Teaching someone how to paint in watercolor is surprisingly rewarding. It's not just rewarding because you get to teach someone how to do something that you know how to do quite well, but you also get this added bonus of you learn something back from them, especially in watercolor. It's a medium that is really easy at the beginning to get instant, beautiful results. And then as you get into the medium, it's got this complexity to it that means that you can go for years just getting better and better at this incredible medium. So I want to show you the best things I've learned about teaching a newbie to paint in watercolor. And it's really about keep it simple. And this video assumes that the person you're teaching has absolutely no knowledge of watercolor. So I'm going to start by talking about the essentials in watercolor. Water, absolutely number one. Palette, watercolor paper, watercolor paint, and a brush. You want to be thinking when you teach someone to simplify absolutely everything. So one jar of water and make it a generous jar. Clean water is essential to the process. Ditch the little tiny ones. Now, the watercolor brush, start with something quite simple but not tiny. This is just a round brush. It's pretty inexpensive and it has quite a lovely tip when it's wet. Often newbies turn up with little tiny brushes like this, little tiny brushes like this, or little ones like this that are incredibly soft. And although it looks like it's got a good point, when it's wet, it doesn't come to a great point. I don't recommend going expensive at the beginning. Interestingly, this is actually a very expensive one. It's a Kalinsky Raphael natural hair, and it's just not necessary. This is synthetic. It's absolutely 1/10 of the price, but it's most importantly, it's bigger. And you don't want to be starting off with little tiny brushes. It's not helpful, not at all. So ditch the little tiny brushes. One round of a reasonable size. Paint. I've got this brand here. I recommend that you go with a brand that is inexpensive but does produce some sort of result. So this is Irodori Watercolour. It's about, I don't know, it's under $10 per tube. You can also go for the Winsor & Newton Cotman brand. That's about $10 a tube as well. And these are great to start off with. You're going to get a lot of pigment coming out of it. This is going to give you the best chance of getting success at the beginning. And when the newbie gets success at the beginning, they're more likely to keep going because they've had some success. If they start off with a set of pans, the difficulty I found for students then was that they spent a long time deciding on which color. Simplify it for them. Just go to 3 colors. I wouldn't necessarily include purple. I'd keep blue, but I had trouble finding any cheap watercolor paint that I have anymore. Go for a red, a blue, and a yellow, and keep it really simple. If you stick to just the basics, then they're going to learn color theory without trying. I don't introduce color theory until they've been painting for quite a while, and only then if they've asked for some information about color theory, because that just complicates things and makes people think they can't paint. And usually people know exactly what colors they already love. So keep it simple. If you just go for red, blue, and yellow, they will learn color theory instantly as they begin to mix red and yellow, orange, blue and yellow, green, and instantly you get color theory happening. Right, simple paint, simple brush, simple water, but big, and a simple palette. Now, I thoroughly recommend a round palette. You can get palettes in absolutely every shape. I found that as soon as I switched my newbies to a round palette, I could start to say, okay, if you keep your yellow there, your blue there, and your red there, you will be mixing green in between yellow and blue. You'll be mixing purple between red and blue, and you'll be mixing orange between yellow and red. So without having to tell them anything about color theory, you start to demonstrate color theory and they just start to learn it without having to think about it. It's such a brilliant way to go. This is a ceramic version of a round palette. So as soon as they get a little better, convert them to a ceramic palette because it is so much better. I won't go on about ceramic palettes. I've got a whole video on why they're awesome. Okay. simple round palette. 2 types of watercolor paper. Now, this is Arch, but any premium brand will do. This is a really cheap watercolor paper. There's a type of relief that comes with a piece of paper that you can discard quite easily because you've mucked about on it or you've color tested on it, that kind of thing. But as soon as possible, switch them onto the good stuff so that they can see the beautiful difference that occurs. Now, what I found with newbies, I used to put out a list of stuff that you could bring to class. I found is that people would turn up with things like this, sketch and wash. This is not watercolor paper. They would turn up with this one, a field pad, not watercolor. And they would turn up with only cheap watercolor. So I would have to gently ease them in. Usually my watercolor classes went for like 6 weeks. So if they only turned up with cheap stuff at the beginning, right at the end of the first lesson, you want to start to introduce the idea of beautiful watercolor paper and start to demonstrate without causing any embarrassment. That for me was key to the process, because you can never assume how much people can afford, and you can on this cheap paper start to get some lovely things happening. Now, I'm going to just squeeze out a little bit of paint, blue, and you don't need much, but you really don't want a skerrick either. If you have a skerrick, I'm just going to use the blue and the red. You'll get the point, because if you're watching this, you probably already know about watercolor. And ow, red. First thing that I do with newbie is get them to wet the brush, wet the paper, grab a little bit of paint, explain that it comes out like Vegemite, but you want to turn it into a watery consistency so that you get beautiful effects. Wash it off, little bit of water on here, and now I'm going to do the same with red, and then here is this beautiful effect that it gets. And you can move straight into, take a bit of blue, stick it between, take a bit of red, and instant purple. And I always start with the basics, wet in wet, and then move straight into wet on dry. Here's some blue, wet on dry. And then I'm going to show you the simplest thing that I love to show them. Let's get a bit of watery paint over there, because you need to start to thinking about tone shortly, but not necessarily on the first lesson. It really depends on at what rate they move. Anyway, the best, quickest thing that I've found success with is the 3-dot flower. You put down 3 dots of paint. It's encouraging them to use the tip of the brush, grab some water, and spread out the paint. Wash it off, grab some water, spread out the paint, and over there, I'm going to make it go into the blue because it's beautiful. And then be thinking about stuff like feed it, and feed it. You want to allow them to experiment. You want to allow them to make mistakes. They get a little bit established. You want to find out what they love to paint. And then you'll work out where to go next. Do you go to a landscape? Do you go to a flower? Portraiture is one of those subjects that you need to learn to draw first before you can paint. Whereas there's so many subjects in watercolor that you can paint without any drawing skills. You can get these sort of beautiful results so quickly. It's so important that they get some version of success so that they go and practice again. And then when they begin to practice, they get better. I hope that helps. Thanks for tuning in, and I hope you get the opportunity to teach someone in watercolor. Thanks, guys. Hope you go paint. Hope you go teach someone to paint. See ya.